Good evening and welcome to a very special presentation here at KNXT. One of the most important issues facing us at this moment in our city and in our county, and also in our country, is the issue of homelessness. We want to spend with you the next hour hearing from you and sharing from our own resources here in the studio. Very generous and positive resources. We have a panel of 8 guests and a studio audience of 20 who will be able to share with you and discuss the questions and the issues that we know are burning in your hearts at this time. A person that we're remembering today in a special way, 1 year after his death, is Bishop John Steinbach. Bishop's next to last pastoral message was on Islam and dealing with our Muslim brothers and sisters. And his last one that he ever gave in August of 2010 was on homelessness. We are going to play now an excerpt from that very important and powerful presentation of Bishop to remind us why we are here and what we want to do to follow the lead that he gave us addressing this important issue in all of our lives.
Thousands of homeless people live in the Diocese of Fresno. They are found in Fresno, Clovis, Bakersfield, Hanford, Lemoore, Visalia, and in practically every city and town in the southern Central Valley. Many live in encampments, along rivers or creeks, under freeway passes, in cars, temporarily in relatives' or friends' homes, in every living condition imaginable. And a growing number of these homeless include children. Most of the homeless are not in our sight, so most of them are forgotten of society. There are perhaps as many reasons for homelessness as there are homeless. Many are afflicted with alcoholism, drug addiction, mental or other health issues, and there are few resources for them to deal with those problems. In today's economy, there is an increasing number of homeless who merely lost a job. There are some who have lost their homes because they live from paycheck to paycheck. They do not have the means either to rent or buy. Our first attitude as Christians must be to respect the homeless and not treat them as if they have no importance or have nothing to do with our lives. They are our brothers and sisters in the Lord. As Christians, we are called to respect these poorest of the poor with a human dignity befitting every child of God. There are always a few who choose a life of homelessness, but these are just a handful of the thousands without a home and who live on the streets and encampments. The vast majority of the homeless have the same hopes and dreams as we all do: to have a job, to have a home, to eat regular meals, and to live with the respect that we all deserve.
I want to thank Bishop. We now have a new bishop, Bishop Armando Ochoa, but Bishop Steinbach has given us a challenge that we are picking up, and I'm sure the new bishop will join us in this effort to not dismiss or forget our most needy brothers and sisters. That's a reminder that the phones are open at this time. The number to call is 559-488-7454. This is an interactive live program tonight, and we hope you'll call in with your concerns and your questions for our panel. Our panel, which I'd like to introduce, is going to be based on 4 goals. The reason that these guests are here are we have chosen 4 goals for our program, and we think that these guests could respond to those goals better than anyone else. First, we wanted to offer an opportunity for all of our viewers to become more aware of what is the issue of homelessness here in the city of Fresno and in the valley. Secondly, we wanted to offer a venue where the destruction of the encampments could be examined in the light of its effects on homeless people. Our third goal this evening is to provide a conversational space so that homelessness could be seen as a very complex issue, but one that does demand an urgent response. And finally, we want to create a positive environment where potential partnerships can be recognized and established to begin working towards solutions to the present situation in which we are finding an impasse. On that note, I'd like to introduce our wonderful panel, beginning with Mike Rhodes, the editor of Community Alliance, Bill Simon, who is on Bishop John Steinbach Homeless Advocacy Committee, our most active chair, you'd say, Preston Prince, who is the executive director and the CEO of Fresno Housing Authority, Greg Barfield, who is the homeless prevention and policy manager for our city of Fresno, Doreen Eley, who is the deputy director at Poverello House, Chris Schneider, who is the executive director at Central California Legal Services, Laura Tanner McBrien, manager of Fresno Unified Project of Access, and finally Kevin Hamilton, who is the chief of programs for Clinica, Sierra Vista, and therefore representing all the work that they do at that agency tonight. One person who couldn't be here tonight is Father Jim Rood, one of our Jesuit priests serving the diocese, who is also at another service in Sacramento honoring another Jesuit, Father Greg Boyle. But in his absence, he sent us a message that is going to set the tone for tonight's evening. Please watch Father Jim Rood as we continue our program.
In August of last year, our beloved Bishop John asked me if I would create a task force to help the homeless here in Fresno. The goals were twofold: education of our people and action. His reasons were all very simple. We all have a great human dignity because we are all children of God. But because we are all children of God, created by the Father, then we are brothers and sisters to one another. And brothers and sisters help one another when they are in need. The second reason is Jesus' love. His love for us was so great that he identified himself with us, especially when we were in need. As we see in Matthew 25, Jesus identified himself with the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, with the sick, the imprisoned, and strangers. And who are strangers? People without homes, the homeless. So when we help the homeless, we are helping Jesus.
Thank you, Father Jim. Thank you, Diocese of Fresno. Thank you, KNXT, for bringing this program to you tonight. We did have a wonderful panel who will be speaking to us immediately, but before that, I did want you to pay attention to our studio audience. These people come to us from many walks of life. They are members of the Bishop Steinbach Homeless Advocacy Committee. They're homeless advocates. They're pastors from local congregations, lawyers, administrators of programs for the homeless, professors, mental health professionals, housing administrators, hospital chaplains, union leaders, medical professionals, and a reporter. We want to thank them for being here, and we want you to keep calling in your calls as our studio audience will be bringing up their questions. We hope you will be sharing yours with us by way of the phone. On that note, I do want to bring up our chance for Mike Rhodes to begin the presentation of the 8 panelists about why he is so passionately committed to the homeless and what it is that he sees we need to deal with first. Mike.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about the homeless in Fresno. First thing I'd like to say is that I think we can end homelessness. And homelessness, as simple as it sounds, ends when people have housing. And we can provide housing for all the homeless people in Fresno. There's plenty of vacant, abandoned, foreclosed housing, and plenty of apartments for people to live in. So it's not a lack of housing, it's a lack of political and economic systems that provide the housing that people need. I'd like to start by showing some pictures from the homeless encampments that I took over the last several months. We have them queued up, and we can show some of those so that we get a sense of what it was like out in the encampments. These encampments are the homes that people developed because of their lack of any permanent housing. It's not where they chose to be. It's not what they wanted, where they wanted to live, but it's what was available. They built these out of their own, with their own hands, and it provided them some shelter from the rain, some protection from the cold, and some safety in having people that live next to them. I would say in particular you had women that are vulnerable, that are living homeless, and they had neighbors they could rely on to protect them from predators. One of the problems that we have with the current policy is that when the city destroyed all of the housing that the homeless people had, there was a gap or a lack of ability to provide an alternative for people to live. So where they're living now is in literally sleeping on the sidewalks. And I have been an advocate for having safe and legal encampments where homeless people can go until they get that housing that they so desperately need.
Bill Simon.
I first got involved in working with the homeless 40 years ago in Chicago. And at that time, almost every homeless person was a veteran of World War II or the Korean War. The problem has gotten much worse since then. In addition to the veterans who we still have on the street, we've added drug addicts, mentally ill, and in today's economy, we've added a lot of people who just lost their jobs and their houses and everything they have. And so it's a much bigger problem than it was. In fact, 40 years ago, homeless were not unsheltered in the same sense they are now. They lived on Skid Row and could stay in a cheap rundown hotel or in a flop house, which was basically a big room with chicken wire compartments, cubicles. I thought it was awful, but things have gotten worse since then. A few years ago, some of the homeless sued the city after an encampment was closed because the city had destroyed their property. And the court order said that in the future, the city would have to store property for 90 days so people could reclaim it. On October 27th, the city started by closing the encampment on Santa Fe, and then scheduled the rest of them beginning November 1st. On October 31st, we went out, several of us went out to the encampments to talk with the people, take pictures of their belongings, make sure they realized the city was supposed to store their property, and we helped them put up signs that this is my property. This is one of the first women I talked to. She had a really nice setup, and the bulldozer came after I told the crew that she wanted everything, and they saved a little bit in 3 plastic bags, some textbooks. She was a student at Chavez Adult School, and a little bit of clothing. And then the bulldozer came and just smashed their structure with everything that was in it, ran over it, and put it in the dump truck. And that was repeated over and over again for several days, both by CalTrans crews, as you see here, and also by city crews.
Schneider.
Thank you, and I want to thank KNXT for sponsoring this dialogue. At Central California Legal Services, we work on a daily basis with low-income members of the community. Many of them are homeless or on the verge of homelessness. One of the things that has concerned me about the discussion around the closing of the encampments is that the way that some members of the city of Fresno have described the homeless in very stereotypical ways and prejudicial ways against the homeless community, when in reality we're talking about many families, veterans, people who just lost their jobs or can't pay a medical bill. It's a tremendous, when you see the way that their property was destroyed in clear violation of the settlement agreement, it's clear that something has to happen, that this policy has to change. CCLS was really excited when the city announced that they would have a housing first policy. We support that. We think that is a great policy, and we applaud the city for the people who have been housed through the housing first policy. However, for many people, it's not housing first, it's demolition first. That has to change. People have to have a safe place to camp, to have access to porta potties until they can have real housing, to have garbage pickup, to have a place where they won't be harassed and can live in relative safety.
Thank you, Chris. Doreen, Eley.
First of all, thanks a lot for inviting me on the program, and this was really a good idea for this television station to take this on. Poverello House, as you know, has been here for almost 40 years, just serving the homeless with meals, showers. We have limited housing at Naomi's house. We have a men's rehab program, and we look and deal with this issue every day. Homelessness is something that is not a very easy problem. There's no one agency, there's no one individual, so it's really a community problem that demands a community response. Housing is very important, and yes, unfortunately in the Valley we may have a lot of foreclosed homes, etc., but it's also about economics, and it's also about services. It's not only just putting a person into housing, but it's helping them be successful once they get there. We also are on the board of the Fresno Madero Continuum of Care, and we work very hard, that entire body, every day to help not only provide housing, but also provide some of the services that the homeless need.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Kevin Hamilton.
Well, thanks for having me here tonight, Jim, and for taking up this issue that is just so important to our community and to ourselves as human beings and our care for our fellow human beings. This is the ninth time since 2006 that the city of Fresno has bulldozed people's homes on the street. Why would we do something like that? Why would we do it 9 times? 9 times since 2006. This seems ridiculous in a time when we don't have enough money to support the services we need for the community. We don't have enough money to fund our police departments, our public health departments, yet somehow we find enough money to drag bulldozers down to homeless encampments and run bulldozers through them, pick them up, and then after that's gone, take a look at the downtown right now. What we see is a chain link jungle. This has been a really huge boon for the chain link industry in Fresno, because every time something is bulldozed down, we then chain link off that piece of property, which is now vacant, sitting there doing nothing as it was before, other than the fact that it was actually housing something and doing a little bit of something, and we have nothing. Now, what's the result of all that? Well, organizations like ours that have a federal responsibility to provide health care for the homeless and also some mental health services have to find these folks. We need to be able to locate them in order to provide them services. So if we followed Chris's idea and others who were on the 10-year program to plan to end homelessness, we would have these safe encampments set up, locations where folks like us could find these people, make sure they get the services they need, and help them on the pathway out of homelessness, to be sure that they were in a safe environment while they make their way out of this condition. Contrary to popular belief, most people on the street don't want to be there. There's this perception for some reason that most of the homeless want to be homeless. That's just not true, and it's not our experience in dealing with these folks, as we do every single day of our lives working at Clinica Sierra Vista.
Thank you, Kevin. Laura Tanner McBrien, could you speak for the FUSD situation and how you're dealing with this with homeless youth?
Right, and thank you very much for allowing the voices of the children to be heard. In the context of this situation, we do have families where parents maybe were out in the encampments and children were in other locations being cared for. Fresno Unified alone has over 2,700 identified homeless students in the district. It's a huge number, and the families come through our doors every day without a place to go that night. We work very closely with agencies to house them. We have to work together. According to the census, we are actually educating the poorest of the poor children that are out there, and working with the other community agencies to get our children served has done tremendous things for their schooling. We actually have positive results for our children in their academics. For the past 10 years, our California standards tests have actually gone up for our homeless children. For 10 years, it has gone up. And that's incredible, you know, considering what they go through every day, not knowing where they're going to sleep or eat or lay their head that night, do their homework. A lot of times we have opened the schools for homework space and tutorials so that we could work with the kids beyond the school day. They don't have those kinds of opportunities where they are staying for the most part. Many of the children out there need us as a community to help support them so that they can do well and grow up to be something very productive in our life.
Thank you, Laura. I'd like to remind our viewers that there are phones available. We have some calls coming in already. We also have our studio audience to hear from soon. We still have 2 panelists to share their own passion for the homeless and what it is that they are trying to do at this very difficult time, this very, very complicated, complex time for the economy on all levels, even city, even county, state, and federal. Preston, can you speak for the Housing Authority and your commitment towards the homeless?
I will try to do that, Bill. Thank you for having me here tonight, and I'm enjoying so far the conversation.
Thank you, Preston.
So the Housing Authority of the City and County of Fresno houses 18,000 families, about 50,000 people throughout Fresno County. Over 80% of those households make less than 30% of area median income. So for a family of 4, that's less than $20,000 a year. And while we house 18,000 families in Fresno County, there are over 20,000 families and individuals who need housing that we cannot provide that housing to because we don't have those resources. So what we've done over the last 4 years is we have started prioritizing, recognizing that we can't serve everybody, but there are certain populations that are very vulnerable and that they need a prioritization, that they should move to the top of our list. And one of those populations is the chronically homeless, particularly those with severe mental illness. About 3 years ago, the Housing Authority entered into an agreement, a partnership with Fresno County. We helped create the Mental Health Services Act housing plan so we could identify the ways to implement Mental Health Services Act funds to create permanent supportive housing. And the Housing Authority Board made a commitment of, at this point, it's $2.8 million of very important, precious, unrestricted dollars in our reserves to create housing for the homeless. We've used $1 million in partnership with the City of Fresno, including the housing that we provided for people in the encampments. We've housed 735 individuals. Today, 88% of those individuals are still retained in housing. So that's 650 individuals. In addition to that, the Housing Authority has leveraged approximately $1.8 million of our funds. We have leveraged over $20 million of city, county, state, and private equity, $15 million of private equity coming into Fresno to create 120 units of permanent supportive housing targeting those who have severe mental illness. So the Housing Authority is increasing our awareness of the issues for the homeless. We are creating the Housing First developments. We can talk about what is Housing First down the road, but we are putting into the ground housing opportunities for those who are chronically homeless.
Thank you very much. We've had 7 of our panelists. We finally hear now from Greg, who winds up being the one actually bearing the burden often of what's going on. Greg, your chance to make a first presentation and to be able during the evening to obviously explain more. But for an opening thought, what would it be, Greg?
Well, first, thank you, Jim, for having us and putting this together, and definitely to the diocese for the work that you have done over the last year plus with the Bishop's charge. My job as the Homeless Prevention and Policy Manager is really to implement the policy of the City of Fresno, which is also the policy of the County of Fresno, which is the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. So I get to work with everyone on this panel and many of the folks in the audience. I'm not the only one who has this burden, but when it comes to the day-to-day operations and the day-to-day responsibilities, I tend to be the one who is singled out for that call. It has definitely been a challenge. This has not been the easiest job. No. And many times I go home and I worry about this person and that person, and there are many restless and sleepless nights that go into this. But I am thankful to this community for having this conversation, because when I originally started this job, it was just looked as the city's responsibility. And over the last 3 full years that I've been in this position, it has now turned into more of a community conversation. And I think we're at this juncture right now, tonight, where it's about how do we intersect these conversations into one larger one. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here tonight. And again, I want to thank you and everyone here tonight.
I want to thank the panel for their opening presentations. I hope all of you who have been watching are impressed at the commitment of so many different people in so many different professional fields and personal commitments to be here tonight, but to be daily committing to this issue. We'd like to open up now to our studio audience who have prepared questions themselves. First, we'll begin with Noreen's, and then we're going to let our phone questions that have come in be prioritized, and we'll start answering some of them. Noreen.
Hi, Noreen Nelia with Central California Legal Services. My question is for Mr. Barfield. How many people were displaced by the destruction of the encampments? And out of them, how many have found housing available for them?
So in July of this year, a project called Project P4 was undertaken, where assessments were given to 287 individuals who were in and around the encampment south of Ventura. As of this point, approximately 80 of those individuals have been either linked to housing and services, and we are continuing on a daily basis to continue to link as many people as possible to housing and services.
If I could interject into that question, so facts are always useful in these situations. The FMCOC, of which Doreen and I and other people in this room are all part of, is tasked annually with doing a homeless count, a street count of the homeless. And we only count people on the street. And we do 2 separate counts, one of those who are sheltered and one of those who are unsheltered. In the unsheltered count for 2011, we had 3,271 people. Now, earlier today, I did a lot of web work looking for available housing units in the city that are in projects, which are wonderful projects, by the way, and certainly a good start. But I was only able to find 124 available units. Now, there's other units on paper, another 120 or so, say 200. But I'm talking about 3,000 people, 3,000 people who are unsheltered. There were 1,100 in the shelters, but there were, which is still just a horrible situation, but at least had a roof over their head. 3,000 people. Of those, a majority are in these camps. We just displaced all of these people. Now, where are they? Well, we're finding them all over Fresno. They're so resilient. They just move out, move around, and now they'll move back. And we'll have the same problem again because we didn't create a solution yet. We're working on solutions, but we don't have one yet.
Jim, I'd like to respond to that as well. This morning I went down at about 5 o'clock in the morning to Santa Clara near F Street, and I found where some of these people are living. And I took some pictures, which we might have available to see. There were people sleeping on the sidewalk right in front of a vacant house, a boarded up house. There was 2 of them right next to each other, and there were about a dozen people sleeping on the street, on the sidewalk. That's where those people have ended up. There were more of them down on G Street by the rescue mission, probably 20 or 30 people there. People have no place to go. So that's a picture that you're looking at right now on Santa Clara. That person is sleeping on the porch there of a house that could be available to people. So it's a profound failure of our economic and political system that we cannot connect homeless people with the housing that is right next to them. What I'm arguing for here is a safe and legal place where homeless people can go right here and now so that they have drinking water, they have a place that they could have shelter, they have trash bins, they have portable toilets, a decent place for people to live. That's not too much to ask. We as a community can do that.
One thing that's going to be very important tonight is to recognize what Mike just finished with. We as a community must step up. And I think that's very important that we not lay the burden on any person or any project alone, but it's all of us. And that's why we're here tonight, to look at the future. But looking at the past, there is a question that did come in on the phone, the first call that came in. Why did the city do it in the middle of winter before the start date of the construction project? Couldn't they have just waited a month or to a better season if it's a safety issue? Greg, they just wonder the moment of this demolition process.
I think any time is a bad time. You know, when in one of the instances, it's ironic because that location is actually going to be housing for 70 individuals in just the coming days when that project closes escrow and they begin the construction there. And in the other case, it was an issue of the demolition of a bridge which has been sitting, unfortunately, unused and underutilized for at least 7 or 8 years. And at the time that the decision was made, it was understood that that bridge would be coming down very shortly. So that time has since been slightly delayed, but no time is a good time.
We do have from our studio audience the pastor, the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Fresno. Brian, what is your question?
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, panel members. So with the destruction of the temporary homes of the homeless in October, a low estimate, 300 people lived in those downtown encampments. That's maybe 10% or less of the, if it's a low number, 3,000 unsheltered homeless living in the city of Fresno. So what is the city's plans for the people who did live in that encampment and are now dispersed and out living on the sidewalks? What's the city's plan for that? And what is the city's plan for the numerous other people in the thousands who did not live in the encampments?
Well, thank you, Reverend. I think the city has always clearly said that we can't focus on this one small specific area because homelessness is a community-wide problem. And again, as we were talking in the very early stages of our dialogue, this is also not just the responsibility of the city of Fresno. This is the entire community's responsibility. We worked with our partners back to the summer, the Housing Authority and Angels of Grace, the Resources for Independence, Poverello House, and many others, to provide assessments to these individuals who were in this affected area south of Ventura. And that's where we get the 287 number. It is still our intention and still our hope to continue to link those individuals to housing and services. But at the same time, we can't focus on just that area because there are folks calling from throughout our community asking for services and assistance. And we've been fortunate in the last 2 years to use stimulus money from the federal government. Unfortunately, that money is going to soon run out for us. And so we're going to need to continue to find a community-wide solution.
And if I may add something, so I came here 4 years ago, and when I came to Fresno, I was pretty embarrassed, ashamed by what had allowed to happen. So I guess my question, you asked, what's the city going to do? My question would be back to the faith-based community. I don't understand how they allowed the encampments the way that they developed to happen. We had Barbara Poppy, who heads up the Interagency Council on Homelessness, come to Fresno. She toured the encampments near Poverello and said that they were the worst encampments she's seen anywhere in the country. And that's what, when I came here, that's what I saw. And the conversation I had with Barbara Poppy, she actually asked Greg and I, as we were talking with her, she asked whether this community thought it was the moral obligation of the individual to do something about taking care of themselves, or is it the community's responsibility? And I really think that we here in Fresno need to ask ourselves that. And the answer, I think, is we here in Fresno believe it's the individual's fault. So we kind of say, well, they get what they deserve. They've made their choices. They got to be accountable for those actions. I think personally that it's our responsibility as a community. And I know that we are trying our best to create housing, permanent housing options. We have been working with landlords. We have over a dozen landlords who are now housing people who are homeless, who when we first went to them said, no way, we don't want to do that. Now they're saying, wait a minute, these are wonderful people and are great tenants and we want them in our housing. I really put it back to the faith-based community to step up and to help change the dialogue and change the priorities of this community so that we can have investment in the housing.
And I would really like to add to that also, to kind of echo also what Preston is saying, not just the faith-based community, but this entire community. I'm not from Fresno, I'm actually from New York City. And when I first came here quite a few years ago, about 10 years ago, what I noticed is that there was a lot of building that was happening all around the city, and it looked like the core was being left alone. And as I started work at Poverello House about 9 years ago, we didn't have those encampments. And now all of a sudden, you know, slowly but surely, it became to be this huge encampment area. And it is not just, as I said in my opening remarks, there are a lot of people, all of us on this panel, a lot of you out there work very hard every day to help those that we can. But there's a whole community here. It is not just the city, it is not just the county, it is not just the faith-based. And believe me, a lot of these individuals need a little bit more than just housing. There's some services that they need also.
And
Chris, please.
And this certainly is a community issue. It's not just the cities or the counties or the faith communities. It's all of it. But going back to Brian's question, what happens to those people who need the services? You know, some of the service providers were going out there and talking to them and finding out what their problems are. Now they're dispersed. Now we can't find them. So nothing was solved. In fact, the problem was made worse.
And I just want to make one more comment there on this. The community issue, which I support entirely. We've got some extraordinarily wealthy people in this region, beyond belief. Some 4 of the only billionaires in the country actually live right adjacent to Fresno or in Fresno, which I find fascinating.
I do.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. However, we need to keep in mind that this community we're talking about, bringing resources to bear, 27% living in poverty. 1 out of 4 people. 1 out of 4. We rank highest in California for poverty. We have 43% of the poor people living in poor communities. So the poor aren't even dispersed across the city, they're concentrated into poor communities. So asking, and that's just the people who rate on the federal poverty line scale as being poor. That's a very low scale for those of us who live with it. I actually have a copy of it on the wall beside my desk, so I can always remind myself of just how it is. So there's a larger group of people that live in near poverty or on the edge of poverty, just above the poverty line. They got nothing to give. They can't do anything other than pay their bills, pay for their housing, keep their children safe every day. And they're often crammed into houses, 2 and 3 families to a household now. We're seeing the doubled up feature, which HUD removed from its definition of homelessness. But in healthcare, we still have to keep that. It's interesting how federal programs can change so they don't have to provide, well, it appears they wouldn't have to provide as much money to support the problem.
Let me jump on this one too. Greg mentioned earlier that there was an assessment done last July, and the agencies have been working on trying to get people into housing. And often I sense a frustration by some of the people who work with the agencies because the people don't necessarily follow through and get into the housing. We have to get more creative, maybe especially in the questions we ask. I was real impressed on November 1st at the encampment called The Church on Broadway in Monterey. Pastor Jimmy Foote talked about the fact that these people we call homeless aren't homeless as much as they're houseless. One of the things that's really impressive when you go out to the encampments or even to the street corners where a few people are together is they really live in communities. They have small families. They really have a home. And when we ask one of them to move into housing, we're asking them to leave home. Maybe we need to figure out how to move the whole family into housing together. And there are so many reasons people can't follow through, depending on the reason they're homeless. They have to get ID, they have to maybe get a disability signed by the doctor, they have to find an apartment, they have to do all kinds of things. And I think one of the things that the community and perhaps the faith community can do is to befriend the homeless and help them work through those things, encourage them to make appointments, help them find an apartment if it's up to them to find it, maybe collect things from their churches to furnish the apartment, visit with them regularly after they move in, because at the last Fresno Madera Continuum of Care meeting, it was pointed out that 68% of those who've gotten housing remain in housing for 6 months or more in Fresno and Madera. And the national average, I think, was closer to 77%. We need to be able to encourage people so that they stay there. And I think that's something members of the community and maybe especially the faith community could really work on.
You mentioned, can I just try a question here? Because this panel, if we don't give them another question, they'll use that one up all the time. Which is really fine. Getting a lot of reads on the question, very, very appreciated. But here's a new question from Terry, a good friend over at Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And here's what she says. How do we educate the community about homelessness so that they are not so judgmental? I wonder if one of you will address the issue of the image that is present about the homeless and how to reverse that image.
Well, let me start,
Great.
if you don't mind. And I know all my friends will chime in on this one. That person that you're having a dialogue with, who you may see with a sign or on the street corner or whatever, that's someone's mom, that's someone's sister, that's someone's brother, that's someone's father, quite possibly. And what we have to do is get beyond that stereotype and have a conversation. That's what Bishop talked about, and that's what our charge should be. Let's figure out what was it that got this individual to this point where they're here on a street corner or they're under a tarp someplace seeking services and help. What is it? And sometimes just having that conversation. Hey, how did you get here? It's not an overnight thing. It's a series of things that a person goes through. Laura kind of mentioned it with the doubled up families and how sometimes, they're taking care of the kids and mom and dad or someone, the parental unit might be the one who ends up in the encampment. Those are the conversations we need to start with.
Another conversation is this one. I'm waiting for someone to answer this for me. This is from Julie. We have homeless people who sleep on the steps of our organization's building. We do not shoo them away. However, many of our neighbors give us flack because they don't see this as safe or sanitary. How can the city help us? We are concerned about people who are homeless. Chris, what can we do?
Safe ground for the homeless. A place where they can have an encampment and not live in fear of all their worldly possessions being scooped up by the dumpster and dumped in the trash bin. That's what they need. And it would be easy to do.
Well, unfortunately, I just wanted to. That within our homeless encampments, people are vulnerable. They're taken advantage of. One of the young men that we housed recently out of the encampment talked about being abused many times in the encampment. So I think safe ground is not an answer. If we settle for that, I think that we're doing a disservice to ourselves, to our community, to our members. We need permanent housing, and there is something you can do. In where I came from, the faith-based community got together. They sent cards, they postcards to the mayor and said, we want something done about this. They showed that there are voters, that there are people who are going to hold the elected people accountable. So I think let's do something permanent, not something that's temporary that leaves people vulnerable.
Is that the Seattle program?
No, I was in Seattle, but Aurora most recently. But yes, I was in Seattle before that. So.
Which also...
I have to disagree with Preston at this point, because that leaves people out in the cold. I agree with him that we need to pressure our elected officials and that the faith-based community needs to be more active in that area to fulfill their responsibility under the law to these folks. But in the meantime, something has to happen to preserve them. Safe spaces that we talked about as we created the 10-year plan to end homelessness that didn't get into the plan, that Chris refers to, include security guards, include the sanitation issues that we're talking about, include watching people organize themselves. For a while, people were left alone, and they really started to organize themselves as a community, which was really amazing for me to watch, including creating their own security within the camps. What happened is, as that gets knocked down and shoved to one side, the society that's been created there that people really want and need starts to fall apart. So we need that short-term solution of safe areas for the homeless to go while we're building Preston's long-term solution to solve the problem permanently. So we agree and we disagree here, I think.
Which is what hopefully the dialogue is doing this evening. We hope that what you're learning tonight is that there are so many sides to this complex issue that we are not even able to hardly scratch the surface. We are trying. Our studio participants, Dr. Jean Kennedy, to share her question. Jean.
Yes, good evening, everyone. That was a very good conversation. And I thought, how could I fit my question into what I've just heard? And as an organizational psychologist, as well as a community educator, I also witnessed, and even with some of the videos, the destroying of the camps. And so I'm wondering, my question is to Mr. Barfield, and maybe others can support him or help that answer come through. Why did the city think that this was the only course of action to take when the city went in and destroyed most of the camps, the tents, and the furniture of all of the homeless?
Well, I can't really speak to that logistical issue of the property, whether it was personal property or whether it was soil property. My focus has always been about the housing side of it. And there are oftentimes conversations that occur where an individual might say, that's not something I want, or it could be soiled. But there is documentation that goes into the community sanitation's decision to throw something away versus to keep something.
So I'm going to jump in on
And I'll jump in after him.
Thank you, Bill. So I would say to that the city of Fresno should not have destroyed homeless people's property, destroyed all these encampments, unless they had someplace better for them to go. And they didn't. They clearly did not have a short or midterm plan where people can go and be safe. They deserve the same protection that everybody else in this community does. They should have police protection. There shouldn't be people being victimized there because they should be protected by our police department. They should have portable toilets. They should have trash bins. They should have drinking water just like everybody else in this community has. It is unconscionable that we do this to our homeless people and leave them with no options other than sleeping on sidewalks. And we can do better than that. We've got to have a short-term plan, and it's part of the city's responsibility and the rest of the greater community to come up with that plan. For example, I personally took responsibility for putting trash bins and portable toilets out at the encampment on F Street, because I saw a need there and I knew that the city wasn't doing it. Other people could do the same thing and could do more. So it's our responsibility, and we need to push the city to do a better job with these short and midterm obligations.
There are permanent housing is obviously the ultimate solution, but there are thousands of people who won't get into permanent housing in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Something has to happen with them besides say, oh, permanent housing. As far as the trash element in closing the encampments, I was down at Broadway in Monterey today, and obviously, if the people couldn't carry it away, it was trash. I watched them throw out somebody's drum. I knew people had guitars. I never saw a drum down there before. A bookshelf that looked very much like the one I have in my house. Shopping carts, trash bins, milk crates, chairs. All kinds of chairs, much like the ones we're sitting on, upholstered chairs and couches, things that nobody could carry away because they were too big, or there was some confusion as to whether it would really happen today, and a few people thought it wouldn't, so they weren't even there. But they cleared the city, and CalTrans clearly trashed stuff that was good property and should have been stored.
You know, Chris, last remark, and then we'll move to another question.
You know, one of the questions that comes up is where would the city come up with the money to do these types of things? But if you look at what was spent on doing the destruction, if you look on what the city has spent in defending frivolous defense of lawsuits, and what they will spend in defending other strong lawsuits, and the millions they have paid and will pay to settle those suits, that's where the money comes from.
Now, we know that tonight we're actually opening up perhaps more discussion because we're obviously not settling on anything. It seems we're going around the corner, but that's fine for tonight, because for tonight, if we can raise issues and make connections with our panelists, all of the people who are speaking tonight are going to be available to you through our website. It's www.knxt.tv/homeless. They've all given us permission to have their websites and their information connected to ours so that you can follow up with many of our guests. And even those who are in the studio audience, we also are listing them as resources. So we want to thank all of you for sharing what you've shared, knowing there's much more that you would like to share that will happen vicariously through our web posting. I want to try a question, though, that's very focused. We seem to be repeating a lot about the demolition. Let's move to another area that's more specific and also, I think, probably more urgent. It's about teens. And I'll raise the question probably for Laura, and then I think if Michelle would be hearing the question, and if she found this a moment to respond, it would make a lot of sense. Michelle, here's the question. What is the community doing for the increasing number of teens who find themselves on the street? What resources are available for doing intervention or truancy, on truancy, dealing with health issues, potential teen pregnancy? Can you address that in some way, Laura, and then Michelle Tartunian?
Right. The Fresno Unified School District provides case management to students and families. And so if youth are on their own, if they're under 18, of course, we need to make reporting and make sure we provide services as well. But we do provide the outreach. We do provide the connections. We work very closely with the EOC Sanctuary, transitional living centers. We've seen youth show up at schools and actually tell counselors that they have no place to go that night and give us a call, and either through the 211 United Way number or through calling the Sanctuary TLC program and their street outreach people, we've been able to house youth that way. But there are many youth out there that are couch surfing, that are moving from place to place. They've been kicked out of their homes, and we have a number of those in our district. In fact, probably over 1,000 kids that are living with someone who's not their legal guardian, someone they've been either dumped off with or they've gone to stay with, but not their guardian.
Thanks for mentioning sanctuary, which brings us to Michelle. Michelle, introduce yourself and tell us the great resource that you are, that your Sanctuary for Youth is. Introduce us to the EOC's project.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Michelle Tatunjian. I'm the director of EOC Sanctuary and Youth Services, and we have many programs that target homeless youth. One of them is our emergency youth shelter. We've been operating that since 1992. We have 500 youth that are served there every year, and that's for 11 to 21-year-olds that are runaway or homeless youth. We're the only voluntary emergency youth shelter within 6 counties. We serve non-system, non-delinquent youth in that facility. That's on Calaveras and N Street. And any youth that's listening tonight, if they need access to that shelter, there's an 800 number, 1-800-821-4U. So I wanted to throw that out there. And also on cell phones, you could text for help. And we are a partner with National Safe Place. And there are yellow signs at all the Fresno Unified School Districts and actually 263 Safe Place sites, access points throughout Fresno County, where any youth can go to a Safe Place site and get a free ride and a free from Fax Bus. The Fax Buses is one of our Safe Place sites, and they can get a free ride to our youth shelter. So I wanted to mention that. And the text for help is text SAFE and 69866, and it'll tell you nationwide where the nearest shelter is for a youth.
Thank you very, very much, Michelle. I want to thank the studio audience, which has made themselves available. All 20 of you are here with different expertises. Believe it or not, we've answered or addressed 3 of your questions of the 20 that are ready to be looked at. So that's why we wanted you to know, everyone, we're going to be here for another half hour. Not to think that in a half hour we'll finish this so well and we'll be all done with it and move on to another topic. Begin last year. It didn't begin with the demolitions. It didn't begin in 2008 with the disaster of our economy. It's an epidemic. It's something we are not wanting to get used to, but something that we can't avoid anymore. So we will be here many, many more times, but hopefully building on our first initial experience this evening. So I want to thank our panel for the first hour. You were so excellent that you've been reelected for another half hour. And I want to really, I am not kidding. The thought was, if this program is still reaching people and people are still watching, and that's why they're calling, but they haven't called in about 10 minutes, so I'm hoping people are still up at 9:30 tonight. Please call in with your questions. And now I think I'd like David Weichel, who is the Executive Director of Mental Health America Central Valley, to share a question that really is going to reflect, I think, his own position, his own feeling about an issue that is not only about mental health, but it's about the whole issue of homelessness, which does affect him personally and professionally. Thank you, David.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me, Jim. I really appreciate the time. So this question it's a very, very simple follow-up question to the last question. And so as we know that at the homeless encampment, many of the shelters and makeshift homes had names on them, so they were personalized. And what I'm wondering is how does basically tearing down and destroying all these people's property address homelessness? And it's not directed at any one person. It's just an open statement for that.
Or has that been almost that we are very aware that we're not finding it that was productive? Is there any other way to address it except as that is not solving, but it is something that was a procedure? Is there any other way to look at it?
No, it's strictly a procedure, but it does not, as David said, it does not solve homelessness. What it does is bring to the front of a part of the line these individuals who are most greatly affected at this particular time. So those 287 individuals who were surveyed kind of rose to the top and were made a priority over the entire 4,000 individuals in our city who are either in transitional housing or in a place not of their own. But it does not solve the problem. It only helps create a greater bottleneck probably at the top of that particular list. What solves the problem is this kind of discussion, and what solves the problem is us all working together to make sure that not just this group but the entire community and their issues are addressed. Whether it's Laura and the school-age kids, or someone that Michelle may be working with, or someone that Kevin and his staff at Clinica have worked with, that entire group has to be addressed. And that becomes the problem that I think we're all kind of struggling with tonight.
One question that came in on the phone call, and I'm really not sure, it just brings up a memory, and I wonder what happened to it. Something about the mayor's dollar program. Is there any, does it have any legs anymore? Or what is going on with that commitment that individuals can make?
So the Fresno First Steps Home, which is an independent nonprofit that the mayor and some business leaders, came together and said we ought to have something when our stimulus money runs out, actually help fund the Project P4 initiative, so the assessment and the outreach that was done. Close to 100 volunteers came out over a 4-day window to provide the assessments to individuals beginning at 5 a.m. Over that 4-day window. In addition, it's helped provide funding, some seed money for the medical respite, which Clinica is a great partner with in the medical respite. It's 10 beds, 8 at Rescue Mission for Men and 2 at mental health systems for women. And lastly, it's funded a $250,000 effort toward housing up to 20 of these individuals, which the Housing Authority has matched. The goal is to house 40 individuals who don't fit into other programming streams.
I wonder if we could take now our 5th question from our very, very diligent studio audience. Pahua, what would be your question?
Thank you, Jim. Mr. Barfield, I'm sorry this question is directed to you again.
I'm enjoying the conversation with everybody.
So I heard Kevin mention that the city has done this 9 times, going in and bulldozing homeless encampments. And what I'm interested in, and I think most folks are, is the money issue. So Mr. Barfield, how much money goes into something like this, some particular project like this, and why couldn't the money be used to provide or identify housing for the homeless instead of going in and doing these displacement projects?
Well, I haven't been involved in all 9 of the projects, having been in this position since the end of 2008. I don't know, maybe that makes me involved in 4 or 5 of them. I'm not too sure. The main issue with these has been either the pressure upon the city of Fresno to clear out individuals off of property that is not ours. For example, with the Union Pacific Railroad and the 8th Street encampment, the issue was, our need to work with the UP to clear that area. And that's where our first partnership with the Housing Authority produced, some very positive results. This last group, the last 2, are really, again, the forces of, 1, progress in a housing project, and 2, the need to bring down for a demolition project. So, the resources probably could not have been used because they're not dollar-for-dollar resources. It's merely the reallocation of staff to a particular project for cleanup. The community sanitation crew is actually your crew that works 6 days a week, and they provide, the once-a-year neighborhood cleanup that each of us put our stuff out on the corner, and that's the team that does that. But you're right. If there was a way for us to reprioritize and to actually use budgeted money, it would make a lot better sense. But we're just reprioritizing resources, not money.
So the first encampment that the Housing Authority worked on with the city, there's 130 individuals who were affected. 30 of those individuals went into housing programs operated by service agencies. So and we all know the different agencies that are out there. So they were able to get immediate housing. 100 individuals, the Housing Authority was able to house with private landlords. Out of those, 80% are still living in their housing 2 years later. But that program is very expensive. The city put in $500,000. The Housing Authority put in $500,000. And so to house people with rental assistance is just a very expensive proposition. Permanent housing is, in my mind, the right way to go. It has the lowest, the net present value is lower. So I just want to point that out. The second thing is that, and Greg could talk a little bit more about this, we knew that the land was going to be, that the individuals were going to be removed by the private property owner, and we started going into that community 6 months prior to the date. And so we started talking with people. It wasn't like all of a sudden we showed up one day and said, okay, here's your 10-day notice. There were lots of conversations that happened with people, letting them know that this action was going to happen, that we were being, the city was being forced into it. The Housing Authority was there with our nonprofit partners, service providers, to make sure we could talk and connect with people. And unfortunately, they didn't believe that something was going to happen. And so that's why we ended up with, in my mind, why we ended up with a demolition that became so I don't know, large, so noticeable, so big. I think that if people had been working with us earlier, that we would have been able to house them earlier, or we would have been able to address their issues sooner. So.
We have two more panelists that want to jump in right now, but what I'm going to do is throw it to Judy, who is a member of St. Anthony of Padua Parish and also on Bishop John Steinbach Homeless Advocacy Committee, with a question, and then I've got another question that I invented myself. So stay tuned for the question of all questions. Judy.
Okay. Thank you very much. The day before the first destruction of the camps began, October 26th, Father Jim Rood and members of our Homeless Advocacy Committee met with the mayor, Mr. Barfield, and other members of the mayor's staff. And the mayor stated that morning that it could be just 8 hours from the start of the application process for a homeless person to get keys to the door into housing. But we were told the very next day by the county workers who were actually doing the work of with the homeless to get them into housing, that the minimum amount of time to get into housing once the application is started is 30 days. What is the actual experience of people getting into housing, Mr. Barfield, please?
Thanks, Judy. If there were no strings attached, and we weren't talking about the use of federal money, and that person had their issues had been clearly identified, it could be as short as a few days, because then it takes that individual to step forth to find their own housing. In many cases, particularly because we use federal funding, everything we literally do is fairly funded. It takes the eligibility. That means that we've got to collect additional documents, and then that individual then goes out on the housing search. That property has to be inspected too. We just don't say you can go anywhere. That property has to be inspected. So there's a lot of other timelines that are well beyond our control that will allow for a person to be provided with housing.
I want to interject here that these conditions Greg describes very accurately are very difficult to overcome. There's a bar that's very high. We had a woman, one of them is the length of time that someone's been homeless. I think Princeton mentioned earlier chronic homelessness, which is a term we kind of throw around, but they've actually put numbers on this. They have to be homeless for a year. We had a woman who was 58 years old, lost her job, subsequently lost her home, been homeless on the streets for 10 months. Because she'd only been homeless 10 months and was honest about that, we couldn't get her into housing. Miraculous it would be to get anybody into housing in 8 hours. 30 days is really optimistic. I mean, you'd have to hold your mouth right and everything would have to just fall into place. It's more like months. And again, what do you do in the meantime? These people are homeless. This is an emergent situation. This is an emergency.
We were out there this afternoon. I want to make it clear to people who are watching tonight that this is going on today. I was out at the Monterey Bridge where they were destroying homeless people's property and structures as late as this afternoon. And we have some pictures, I think, that show that. One of the women had her home destroyed. She was crying, saying, "That's my home." She had no place to go to. So this is something that is, this is a picture of this woman. She goes by the name of Mother Nature, and they were kicking down her house as this was happening. It was a horrific scene. I mean, I could hardly watch it, let alone talk about it now. She has to live it. I don't know where she is tonight, but this is something that people need to know that's going on right now, and we could do something different with our tax dollars rather than having people kick down poor people's homes like they were. Okay, that said, I want to move beyond this and talk about housing first, because it is actually a solution to ending homelessness, because it's less expensive than leaving people out on the streets the way they are today. We could spend less money and people could live in decent housing if we were to redirect the money that we are already spending unwisely, because people have emergency medical services that they have to pay for, because they have policing issues. If people had housing, we could pay half as much, maybe as much as a third as much as we are currently spending, and we would end homelessness. So what's stopping us from doing that?
Angie, you work with this daily at the Housing Authority. Could you continue the conversation?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to interject because the question was directed to county workers had indicated this at the site. And I wanted to correct that in that I don't believe that those were county workers, because I don't know of a county program that is actually responsible for housing. The Housing Authority is part of the City and County of Fresno, but we're not a county agency. We're not part of the County of Fresno. So it was probably my staff, my team, that you spoke to out there. And I can tell you that they would not have said it would take 30 days to house them, because from the day that we started the cleanup, that the City of Fresno started the cleanup, to the day before Thanksgiving, we had actually housed, from the cleanup to the day before Thanksgiving, at least 23 people were in housing with leases signed. And that's under 30 days. So I know that it can be done. I know that it's very possible. Yes, we run into some of these other issues with the lack of ID and having to wait on some of the criminal background checks for those that whenever we've done those. Or if they've been referred out to other programs, then yes, those other programs have additional criteria, such as what Kevin mentioned about documentation of chronic homelessness and disabilities. But for purposes of what we are doing with the money that First Steps Home has provided and with the dollars that the Housing Authority has matched, it is not taking 30 days to house them.
Thank you, Angie. Before we have Natalie to change the topic just a little about housing and what the faith community is doing about it, I do want to let you know that we are live streaming, and someone actually reached us from Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is actually outside the valley limits, and which is really impressive for us. This is really awesome. And here's the question. Oh, and then Portland, not to be outdone. This is really great. That means people are watching us as we are stretching out with Channel 49, reaching now in 85 different countries. We've heard of 2 other states. Let's try another country next time. Here's the question from Minneapolis, and I don't know if there's an answer, or what it is, I should say. Has the governor or attorney general intervened in some way to stop the continued assault of destroying in the encampments? Do we have any update on this? This might be...
Well, no, the governor has done nothing. Actually, the governor has not even provided funding to address homelessness in our community, except for emergency shelter, right, domestic violence shelters. And more importantly, there's been a call for the last 2 years, so this governor and the one before him, to actually create an interagency council on homelessness. So we can better be able to coordinate some of the services between county, city, and state-related agencies so that we don't cross out each other's regulations. As Kevin mentioned, you know, when you refer someone over to another agency sometimes, your regulations may cross out my regulations, and therefore the person goes unserved. And it would be wise for us in California to actually create this interagency council so that we could address this issue at a state level a little bit better too.
Thank you, Greg. You know, there's many pastors in our group of the 20 studio audience. One of them was by personal invite of me. She gave up something that was very important to do this evening. So I'd like Natalie Chamberlain, who is a disciple of Christ, who is leading the church on the corner of Shields and West, that she would lead us with a question or show us, Natalie, one thing a community like yours does do for the homeless. And then maybe we could shift the gear to what more can we as religious people do for those that we call brother and sister. Natalie.
I'm Natalie Chamberlain, the pastor at United Christian Church, and I'm ashamed that I can't do more. But this problem with people having no place to live is an ongoing one. I've been at the church for 8 years, and there have been homeless neighbors there for that whole time, but there are a great many more in the last few weeks. When people come to my church to sleep, they come because it's safe. There's a street code that says you don't mess with somebody on church property. So when they come to my church, I leave them there. And the congregation does what they can to provide where they can provide. Unfortunately, they come to my church for sanctuary, but the street code doesn't go for people who don't live on the street. So I have neighbors who harass them, and I have police officers who harass them. There's an ancient tradition of sanctuary, as church as sanctuary. And I will defend my church's right to provide sanctuary to anyone who comes to me. I will not condone illegal acts, but I will defend their right, as will every member of my congregation, to live. I mean, they've got a concrete stoop to sleep on. And people harass them because they don't want them in their neighborhood. And I think every church needs to make a stand that there is sanctuary. It is holy ground, and no one has a right to mess with people on holy ground.
Thank you, Natalie.
I'm so in agreement with Natalie. And I have to say, Jim, as I drove in here today, the thought in this, and as I think Preston has pointed out, I see the faith community as a whole. I see some beautiful churches in Fresno with lots of property. I see this facility, which is beautiful, with tree-lined streets and beautiful grass lawns. You could organize a wonderful place for people to go to be safe. And I think if all the churches in Fresno were to take that approach, we could probably get, for a temporary time, a large majority of the homeless off the streets and into safety. And I'm not just trying to put the load on that group of people. There are others also. But I think there's sort of an inherent calling for the faith-based community to take care of their fellows who are less fortunate than they are. Absolutely. I'm not asking them to condone bad behavior, illegal acts, or anything of that sort, but yet there is this opportunity, and I think this conversation has opened that up.
Absolutely. Chris.
And I follow up. I think that's a great idea. I'd like to see it. The question I would have to the city of Fresno is, if churches created safe ground or other people in the community donated property for the homeless to have their encampments and for others to donate for the porta potties like Mike has done, would the city allow that to happen? Would Greg advocate for that in front of the city council, or would it be opposed? As has been indicated, some of the authorities think that it should not be allowed, because we know up in Merced, when a church gave sanctuary, the city police moved in and moved the people out.
I think there are 7 elected individuals that you need to speak to, and you need to find a majority of them who will allow this to occur. The pressure will be on, as Pastor said, will come from the neighbors who will say, I don't want this in my neighborhood, and I don't care if it's a church or not, right? Because that's not my church. And some of them, if they do go to your church, they may still say, I don't want that at the church. So it becomes one of those conversations that we have to have with the electeds to figure out what does it look like. And I know in the case of Merced, no one had really had a conversation of what it should look like. And there was other turmoil within that church, who owned it and who had responsibility over it. But there are churches in our community who are not on the radar who do provide that sanctuary. I know a few of them. Now, I don't go rat them out, but because that's their doing. But it really is about that neighbor relationship. When we tried to do a second legalized homeless encampment set up south, before I started this job, in the southern part of Fresno, just south of the Poverello house, not only did the homeless not like it, but more importantly, the louder constituency was the surrounding neighbors who said, heck no, we don't want it either. So you've got to figure out how to make this work where the neighbors will have some understanding. And that means rules, and at least rules of cleanliness and what have you, I think that have to go into that conversation.
And again, about it being more than just the city of Fresno and more of it being a community. It's nice to ask Greg if he'll advocate. He can advocate all he wants to. But if the neighbor says no, they're going to be right next to him. So what about all of us as individuals? If your church allows it, are you going to say, okay? That's what it comes down to. That's a community response.
You know what it also comes down to, unfortunately, is we have like 9 minutes left, and we're in overtime already. We've already played the full game, and we're in overtime. But what it is I'm going to throw a question to everyone. It's a fair question, because I made it up. And so it's even-handed if I have anything to do with it. It's like this. Actually, not my question. It's Harry Kennedy's, my friend Harry from the Homeless Committee. And here's what Harry asks all of us. I'd like you to give the briefest answer, but a sentence or two. What is one thing people who are watching tonight could actually apply in a practical way to concretely help the homeless in our community? So think for a second. And then you don't have to go in order because someone may like to make it come out first. Could you take turns sharing one thing you are challenging us who are viewers, challenging yourselves as professionals, and challenging us as good people to step up and do something for our brothers and sisters? Who would be first?
Okay, so I'll go first since most of the questions have come to me. I'll start this one off and then I'll be quiet. I think we have to quit having blinders as we pass an individual who we believe is in need, whether it's a sign that they're holding or whether there's the physical attributes of that person. Get out of your car. Have a conversation. What's going on with you? How did you get here? And if there's something I can do to help you get out of this condition, not give them a buck for a burger, but have a conversation beyond that. How can I help you get out of this situation? And become that person's advocate. And if each one of us just took one person, we'd be done tomorrow.
Thanks, Greg.
Echoing off Greg's, don't judge. As Greg said, and what I say all the time, that person is someone's mother, brother, sister, aunt, cousin, grandmother. Don't judge. Don't ever judge.
And I would say remember the children, because the average age of a homeless individual in the United States is 9 years old. So please remember the children in these families and their needs. It takes a village, and so it takes a community to work with these youth and their families, and not to judge. Yes.
3 of you have spoken. Who's the 4th with a practical thing? These have been 3 challenging You're throwing us a possibility of doing something with those 3. What's a 4th?
I'll give you 20 things people can do. Bishop Steinbach Homeless Advocacy Committee distributed a brochure in all the Catholic churches in Fresno and talked about the dignity of the homeless. And if you go to our website, which I think will be displayed on the KNXT website, you can find a copy of the brochure that lists 20 things you can do to help the homeless. Pick any one of them.
In fact, those 20 things are actually agencies, institutions, and projects that can be funded. And some of them are represented here in our studio audience, and some are not. Go to knxt.tv/homeless, and you will find all these resources that Bill is alluding to for practical things. Chris, are you practical?
I'm trying to be practical.
Super.
Bill mentioned the bishop's notice, but also the agencies that do the work. Almost all the agencies that provide services right now are going through funding cuts.
Yeah.
You can donate time or money and get involved.
Thank you. Practical. Kevin.
Well, I'm going to go off of what was said earlier about political will. You can call, first of all, your minister and say, I am fine with people homeless who you let stay on my church grounds. The second call would be your city councilman. Let's help Greg out here. Let's tell those councilmen in North Fresno and East Fresno and West Fresno that we are fine with this. We are behind you 100%. And in fact, we'll go out and talk to 5 of our neighbors and make sure they're fine too.
That's great, Kevin. With all the things we've said that are beyond what we can do, seems, with money, that one is at our possibilities. Cost only energy and a commitment. Thank you for that challenge. Who else would like to go on record with a thing we could do?
All houses of worship in Fresno need to begin working together. So many do a great deal individually for the homeless, but we need to work together. So we should look forward to that and find ways to do that.
We do have some upcoming meetings, and I wonder if we have those ready to go up on the screen that would tell us next steps that we might be able to take. They also build on what Bill just said, that there are meetings and there are commitments being made, and if you would see that one of them is the Bishop's Committee on Homelessness. We will be meeting on December 17th, and we'll be meeting on that day at 10 o'clock here at the diocese, hopefully sharing with you a chance to broaden our base. It was a Roman Catholic base at one point. Now we are including, God willing, many, many different congregations that were here tonight for our gathering. I don't think we let everybody give their practical thing yet. Mike?
I could be brief. I think that there's something that everybody could do. And I would go in the direction of encouraging people to support a safe and legal place for people to live, particularly if they're a church member at their congregation. They could dispel this myth about NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and get rid of that so that homeless people, I mean, Jesus was homeless, for gosh sakes, at one point. So people should remember that and find a place for those people who are homeless to live.
I'll share my 30 seconds with Preston. A final thought, Preston.
Well, I want to go to the federal level. We're seeing dramatic cuts in funding for housing and for homeless programs. I think we need to say to our federal elected officials, we need funding for this issue, and then elect people who will do it. So,
I want to thank all of you who watched this evening, especially our 8 panelists, our 20 studio audience, all the camera people, all the energy that went into this program. We hope you enjoyed it and that you'll decide to commit in some way to dealing with this issue concretely and practically. The end of the program was eminently practical. You heard 8 concrete, positive, doable things, not just aspirations and dreams, but real, practical efforts. We hope you'll join us. You'll look at our website, knxt.tv/homeless, to put your input there and to find resources for you. Till next time, God bless.